You're about to witness something no one else has dared to see. Not because it's forbidden by law or locked away in some dusty archive, but because it burrows into the places your mind doesn't want to go. The shadowy corridors of power and pain, the unsettling intersections where privilege meets raw, unfiltered talent, and where silence screams louder than words ever could. What you're holding in your hands now is less a story and more an excavation, a peeling back of layers that were never meant to be exposed, a secret filed away in the memory of a city that moves too fast to notice what's slipping through its cracks. And here's the question no one has ever dared to ask. What happens when a man who has everything forces a woman who has nothing to reveal the unspoken truths buried inside her? You think you're ready for this? You're not. The night was thick with the kind of quiet that presses against your skin like a warning, like the silence just before a storm breaks loose. In a downtown lounge that shimmered with dark velvet curtains and the heavy scent of whiskey and regret, Charles Whitmore sat in the shadowed corner of the room. A man who had built his empire on the backs of others, but never once let that show. In the polished glint of his smile, his fingers tapped impatiently on the mahogany bar, restless like the thoughts swirling behind his sharp eyes. Everyone in the room thought they knew the story of Charles Whitmore, the ruthless financier, the unapologetic titan of industry. But no one saw the part that nobody talked about, the part that unraveled quietly, like a thread pulled too hard, from the seams of his carefully constructed life. The piano sat under a single spotlight like a sacred altar, its black and white keys gleaming with an invitation only the brave, or the desperate, would accept. The crowd murmured, their glances flickering with a mixture of expectation and something else, something like fear. That night, the air was thick, not just with smoke and the distant hum of jazz, but with the weight of an unspoken command that trembled beneath the surface. The kind of command that doesn't need to be shouted, because it crushes the soul before it's even fully understood. And then she came in, Maya Ellis, a waitress whose skin glowed like warm caramel under the bar lights, whose eyes held stories nobody had ever asked her to tell. Maya was a quiet presence, an echo of a past she never spoke of, and a future she barely dared to imagine. She moved through the crowd with a grace that didn't belong to the polished world she was forced to navigate, the world where her laughter was the background noise to the sharp-edged conversations of men who measured value in dollars and power. She was just another face in the blur of late-night patrons and empty promises, invisible, except for the way her fingers danced over trays and menus. Until Charles Whitmore noticed something that stirred a flicker of unease in the air, something that didn't belong. He didn't say it aloud, but everyone felt it. A silent dare etched into the space between them. With a voice low and firm, carrying the weight of unquestioned authority, Charles called Maya to the piano. It was a command that shattered the fragile barrier between the world she inhabited and the one he controlled. The room seemed to hold its breath as she hesitated. The hesitant pull of a tether snapped loose, leaving her exposed in the sudden, unforgiving spotlight. The fingers that had only ever traced the edges of dirty plates now hovered uncertainly over ivory keys, trembling with a mix of fear and something deeper, a raw, untamed power waiting to be unleashed. Then, with a breath that felt like the first crack of dawn after a long, suffocating night, Maya's hands began to move. The first note spilled out, not with practiced perfection, but with a haunting honesty that cut through the room like a whispered confession. The music wasn't just sound. It was a language older than words, a secret told in the spaces between notes, a truth too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Each chord was a piece of her soul laid bare, unraveling the invisible wounds that no one saw, no one heard, no one dared to acknowledge. Charles's face, usually an unreadable mask, betrayed the slightest tremor of something unfamiliar, something that felt dangerously like respect, maybe even awe. Yet beneath that there was a darker pulse, a fear that this music was a reckoning, a force that could dismantle the walls built with money and silence. The room, once alive with murmurs and clinking glasses, fell into a hush so complete it felt like the moment the world stopped spinning. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. Maya's hands froze above the keys, the last note hanging in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. But here's the thing about moments like this. They never end quietly. As Maya lowered her hands, a whisper slipped through the crowd, so faint it was almost missed, yet sharp enough to shatter the fragile veneer of reality. No one else heard it, not really. It wasn't a word or a name, but a sound, a breath, a secret spoken only to those who dared to listen. Then, like a flicker of light extinguished too quickly, Maya vanished. Just like that. Gone. No footsteps, no gasp, no sign of struggle. She was there 1 second and nowhere the next, as if the music itself had swallowed her whole. What happened? Next didn't make sense. Phones buzzed with calls no one answered. The piano keys, still warm, hummed with a silent echo. And Charles Whitmore sat alone, his eyes wide with a terror no one had ever seen in the man who controlled everything. The question that lingered cold and relentless was no longer about the music or the vanished waitress. It was about what had been unleashed in that room, and who was brave enough to face the consequences. Because some talents don't just leave. You speechless, they change the world forever. And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was waiting. Now, you hold this secret. You, who have seen beyond the curtain, who have heard the whisper that no one else did. The truth is waiting, buried in the notes Maya played, in the spaces where reality cracked and something else slipped through. The question no one dared to ask is now yours. When the silence breaks, what will you do with the voice that finally speaks? The room had emptied so fast it was as if Maya had never been there at all, except for the piano and the stillness it left behind, like a wound in the fabric of the night. Charles Whitmore's eyes didn't move from the spot where she'd disappeared, but as the seconds ticked into minutes, a strange thing began to happen. Doubt. The kind that crawls under your skin and whispers in the quiet, twisting every certainty into a question you can't ignore. Did she really vanish? Or was it something else, something buried deeper in the folds of a mind too sharp for its own good? You start to notice the little fractures, the small glitches no one else acknowledges. The bartender swears he saw Maya walk out with a drink in her hand, but the security footage shows an empty path. No shadow, no trace. Charles, when questioned, stammers over his words, his carefully constructed narrative unraveling in the spaces between what he says and what he means. His voice catches like a faulty recording, the edges of his memory smeared and smudged. Then there's that low, barely audible static that sometimes leaks through the bar's sound system, a buzzing that no one can quite explain, that rises and falls like a breath you're not sure you took. And you, the only one who saw the music, who heard the whisper no one else did, start to wonder if it was all a trick of the mind. Or worse, something darker, a fracture in reality itself. The line between what is real and what is imagined begins to blur, and your own thoughts feel less like your own, and more like echoes in a house that's slowly losing its walls. Memories shift. One moment you're certain about what you saw. The next you're questioning if those memories ever belonged to you. Sometimes you hear a voice on a recording that wasn't there before, repeating phrases you don't remember hearing, phrases that hint at something hidden, something everyone else pretends doesn't exist. It's at this tipping point that a new figure slips into the frame. A man named Elias Gray, a journalist with a reputation for chasing down real, unsolved mysteries, the kind that people whisper about but never speak aloud. He claims to have known Maya, but his story feels tangled, half-remembered, fractured by a trauma he won't fully explain. His eyes flicker with something raw and unsteady, a kind of desperation that makes you want to believe him and fear him at the same time. He's the only one willing to say the things nobody else dares, that the truth behind what no one tells you is more than just a missing person or a strange song. It's a crack in something bigger, something they don't want you to remember. Elias tells you about the nights when Maya disappeared from places no one could find, how she spoke of voices that weren't hers, and memories she never lived. But his words don't line up with the evidence. Files go missing, phone calls go unanswered, and his own story twists back on itself like a dark riddle. You find yourself hanging on every syllable, caught between a craving for truth and a sinking dread that the answer might shatter you. And the more he talks, the more you feel the edges of your own reality starting to fray, the comforting sense of knowing slipping away like sand through your fingers. There's no clear line between breakdown and something unearthly. Is this a mind unraveling, or is the world shifting beneath your feet? The music Maya played isn't just a melody, it's a key, but no one knows what door it opens. And every unanswered question, every silent pause, every missing piece feels like the pulse of a secret too dangerous to face. So you keep looking, keep listening for that whisper again, even as your own thoughts betray you and the truth hides just out of reach. Waiting, always waiting in the shadows where fear lives and the real story begins. For a moment, just a flicker of fragile hope, everything seemed to fall into place. Charles Whitmore's old office, buried beneath layers of polished surfaces and carefully curated power, held the answer. A file, hidden behind false walls of bureaucracy and forgotten. Paperwork revealed what looked like the hidden truth. Maya's disappearance wasn't random, not an accident or a supernatural vanishing act. It was something orchestrated, calculated, a secret buried in cold ink and colder intentions. The documents told a story of a forgotten deal, a cover-up, whispered about only in shadowed corners. Maya had uncovered something in her music, something that reached too close to the edges of a world that refused to be seen. It was in those keys. Her talent was a key, and someone powerful had silenced her to keep the truth from slipping out. The evidence seemed undeniable. And yet, as the truth settled in, something inside your mind flinched. An uneasy echo, a memory glitch you hadn't expected. You thought you remembered a childhood summer, a lull in the noise when your mother sat at an old, creaking piano, her hands trembling as she played the same haunting melody Maya had played. But the memory wavered, hazy around the edges like a dream you can't quite hold on to. The melody wasn't just music, it was a warning, a dark pulse beneath the notes that you never understood until now. And then the past reached out with cold fingers. A news clipping fell from the file, faded, yellowed, almost ignored. A report from decades ago about a girl who vanished under eerily similar circumstances, a girl who had played the same mysterious tune. You'd never heard of her before, but the weight of that lost name pressed down on you, a silent scream buried beneath layers of forgotten years. The deeper you dug, the more you realized that this was no isolated incident. It wasn't about Maya or Charles or even that night in the lounge. It was a pattern, a cyclical shadow that had watched from the beginning, hidden just beyond the edge of sight, always there but never named. This force wasn't something you could fight or escape. It lived in the cracks between memory and reality, twisting perception, preying on the parts of you that wished to forget. The air grew heavier, suffocating with an intimacy that felt like breathing in someone else's fear. You could almost hear it, breathing alongside you, watching, waiting. It wasn't just watching Maya, it was watching you, and the realization stung like ice. The unsettling familiarity, the sense that you'd lived through this before, was no accident. You weren't crazy, they lied to you. The music, the disappearances, the whispered secrets, they were part of a story written into your own life. A narrative you'd been trying to rewrite without knowing the pages you'd torn out were still bleeding ink beneath the surface. Just when you think you've pieced it all together, ready to confront the darkness, a single detail unravels everything. The signature on the documents isn't who it seemed to be. It's a forgery, a ghost playing its own cruel game. The files you trusted become a trap, a mirror reflecting back the lies you thought were truth. The melody shifts again, the familiar, tune now twisted sinister, impossible to escape. You realize that to understand this, to find peace, you'll have to watch everything you've seen and believed from the very beginning with new eyes, new fears. What you thought was an ending is only the start of a deeper nightmare, one that forces you to question not just the story you were told, but your own memories, your own mind. And in that silence you hear it again, the faintest whisper, beckoning you back into the darkness where the real mystery waits, patient and unblinking, just beneath the surface of what you think you know. You were never alone in this. Long before, the piano's final note echoed through that smoky lounge. Before Maya's vanishing blurred into whispered rumors, there were others who have been silently watching, waiting in the shadows, connected by fragments too elusive to grasp, fully but unmistakably linked by the same haunting thread. Their presence is felt not in loud declarations, but in quiet, cryptic pulses. A symbol scrawled in the margins of a forgotten journal, a fleeting image caught in a surveillance camera's flicker, a phrase repeated in a shared dream that dissolves upon waking. These fragments feel like a secret language, designed to slip past your defenses and settle deep inside your mind, unshakable and insistent, a reminder that you are not just a witness, but a participant in something far larger, something alive, and watching you back. You catch the first message in a blurry photograph that appears unbidden on your phone, a grainy figure, half hidden behind an iron gate, their eyes reflecting a knowing darkness that chills you to the bone. There's no name, no explanation, just a set of numbers that don't add up, and a date that sends a spike of recognition through your memory. 20 years ago, when this nightmare first cracked open. The image is like a door, barely cracked, promising answers that taste like ash on your tongue. Found footage from 20 years ago, footage the government never released, or at least pretended never to. You start seeing the signs everywhere. Graffiti etched into alley walls, strange symbols in the static of late-night broadcasts, and coded letters tucked inside books you never bought. They're calling out to you, confirming that you were right, all along to question the silence, the lies, the gaps in what you thought you remembered. But if you weren't alone, neither were the others, and their stories bleed into yours like a fractured mirror. Each of them caught in the same web of memory glitches, their identities flickering like faulty film reels, their minds haunted by the same echoes you can't quite shake. There is Elias, the unreliable journalist, but there are others, ghosts in the machine of this conspiracy, who send messages that slip through the cracks of your waking world, messages that feel personal, intimate, as if they know you, as if they've been inside your head all along, shaping your fears and your doubts. And the more you listen, the more you realize that memory itself is a battleground, a contested space where control is the currency, and you're not sure if your own thoughts are truly yours or borrowed whispers from some unseen puppeteer pulling strings you can't even see. Then from somewhere deeper in the silence, another voice emerges, not loud, not insistent, but steady. An observer who claims to have been tracing this story from the beginning, documenting the fractures in reality with a precision that cuts through the fog. Their words are raw, unpolished, like a desperate diary entry left open on a cluttered desk. They tell you they are the only one telling the truth, but their truth is fractured, filled with doubt and haunted by shadows that refuse to yield. This observer doesn't promise answers but offers something more unsettling, a reflection of your own fears, your own uncertainty. They hint at forces beyond comprehension, forces that have been watching long before you ever stepped into this story and that will watch long after you're gone. Forces that don't just want to keep the truth hidden, but want to rewrite it, erase it, bend it until you no longer trust your own reality. As you stand on the edge of this unraveling, the weight of everything settles heavy around you, the lines between identity, memory, and control dissolving like smoke in the wind. The whispered symbols, the shared dreams, the coded messages, they're not just signs but calls to action, or warnings, or maybe both. They demand that you choose, to run deeper into the darkness or to face the unnerving truth that has been waiting beneath the surface all along. And as the screen flickers, the camera shifts, and the static hums with something alive, you realize this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a reckoning that will change everything you thought you knew about yourself, about what's real, and about the power hidden in the spaces where memory breaks. The question that remains, heavy and unspoken, lingers. When? The watchers come for the truth. Will you be ready to see what's waiting behind the veil? There comes a moment when the weight of everything you've uncovered presses down so hard, it feels like your ribs will crack under the pressure. Not because the facts themselves are unbearable, but because of what they say about you, about us all. This mystery, Maya's disappearance, the music that echoed through forgotten rooms, the unseen watchers and broken memories, it was never just about a vanished woman or a haunting melody. It was about the fragile, terrifying core of being human, our desperate need for connection, for meaning, for the truth in a world built on lies and silence. And now, standing on the edge of what you've chased for so long, you realize the truth might not set you free. It might destroy you. Or maybe, just maybe, it will save you if you're brave enough to believe in a kind of salvation that looks nothing like what you imagined. The room feels impossibly small, though you're alone. The air thick with the scent of old wood and something metallic, like a memory bleeding through the walls. You think of Maya, the way her fingers traced those piano keys, carrying a story she couldn't speak aloud. You think of Elias, with his fragmented truths and haunted eyes. You think of yourself, and the strange, creeping doubt that maybe you've been part of this from the beginning. Not just a witness, but a participant in a story bigger than comprehension. Your hands tremble as you pull the last piece from the puzzle, a confession buried beneath layers of silence and fear. A confession you weren't ready to hear but needed more than anything. The music wasn't just hers. It was yours too. The same melody lived inside you, tangled with the parts of your past you've tried to forget. A song that carried the weight of pain and hope, memory and loss. This isn't a revelation. It's a reckoning. The truth doesn't unravel neatly. It claws at the edges of your soul, forcing you to confront the most uncomfortable question of all. Why was this hidden? Why was the silence so necessary that it could erase pieces of you? And everyone else caught in this web? Because sometimes the truth is too heavy to carry alone, and so it's buried beneath layers of denial, of collective amnesia, of carefully constructed lies that protect and destroy at once. It's a choice. Face the unbearable or live in comfortable ignorance. The line between salvation and destruction blurs, and you stand at the threshold, heart pounding, knowing that once you cross it, there's no turning back. And here, in the quiet darkness, you allow yourself the vulnerability you've denied for so long, the confession you never thought you'd make. You're scared, not just of what you've learned, but of what you might lose if you let the truth fully in. The faces of those you loved, the memories you cherish, the identity you've held so tightly, they all hang in the balance. But beneath the fear, beneath the trembling doubt, there's a fragile thread of hope, a whisper that maybe this breaking is also a becoming. This moment isn't an ending, it's a terrifying awakening, a sudden clarity in the fog that's both beautiful and brutal. You realize that sometimes waking up feels like falling into a deeper kind of dream, one where the nightmares and the salvation are inseparable. As the last notes of that impossible melody echo faintly in your mind, you sit with the silence, feeling the weight of what's been revealed and the vast unknown that still waits. The mystery hasn't ended. It's only begun to unfold in the spaces where memory fades and truth refuses to be silenced. And somewhere deep inside, you know you'll never be the same. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories you were never meant to hear. Until next time, remember, some truths don't want to be found.